I am here from Noodle Nook, and I have a little bit of a rant today, but the rant has purpose, and it's all about talking about presuming competence when you're working with students with significant disabilities. So I was out in the community recently, and I ran into a student that I've known for a really long time, and they were out with a service provider or babysitter, and the babysitter was glad to see me, glad to see that the student had someone out that they knew, and I think trying to show me what he could do, cued him by grabbing his hands and kind of sing-songingly. Together they sang, "Row, row, row your boat." And this is a 17-year-old grown man with facial hair, and he was out in the community singing a nursery rhyme. I had a moment, y'all. I had a moment of a little bit of anger and a little bit of frustration at the same time. And I realized it was time for me to come back and talk about presuming competence in students with disabilities. So I have 10 ways that you can presume competence with students so that you're never in a situation where you're talking to an adult in a way that is completely inappropriate out in the community amongst their peers. So here we go. 10 ways that you can presume competence with your students with autism and significant disabilities. And the number one thing is to treat adults as adults, treat teens as teens, treat kids as kids. We want to treat the students or adults their age. I can't tell you, the 17-year-old singing "Row, row, row your boat" was, oh yeah, you can tell by my face how I feel about that, right, y'all? Yeah. But I've seen this a lot with other students who have disabilities that stunt their growth, or students that are in wheelchairs. People will approach students that are small for their size or are in a wheelchair like they're babies or toddlers or children somehow. And just because a student is in a wheelchair doesn't mean that they don't understand what's going on around them. Just because a student or an adult is not tall or looks maybe like they have a baby face doesn't mean that we talk to them like they aren't the age that they are. So number one thing is, please treat adults like adults, treat teens like teens, treat tweens like tweens, treat the person their age. Don't infantilize somebody with a disability because they have a disability. Ooh. All right, number two is to include the person in the conversation. So we don't want to talk over somebody. We don't want to talk like they're not there. And this will happen a lot to me when I go into classrooms. I'll walk up to a student and I will say, "Hello, how's your day going?" And an adult will answer for them and not give them an opportunity to respond. Or the adult will presume I'm talking to them and not talking to the student at all. I really go out of my way to include a student in a conversation so that we aren't talking around, above, through them. They're there, let's include them in the conversation. Even if a student is nonverbal and can't respond, or response time is slow, they're there. Let's acknowledge their presence and not treat them like the furniture. Number three, don't ask a question if you can't wait for an answer. This really bothers me with students who have VOD devices and communication systems that take a little bit longer to navigate. And this will happen, I'll be walking with a student and they have their VOD in hand, and we'll pass somebody in the hallway and the person will be like, "Hey, what's going on?" And the student grabs their device trying to respond, and the person is gone before they get a chance. And it really, it doesn't give that positive reinforcement of being able to use the device. It kind of teaches you like, hey, don't bother. They're not going to wait anyway. What's the point? And that bothers me so much. So if you're going to ask a question to a student with a disability, give them a second to process the information. Whether they're using a device or not, sometimes you do get a response facially, so that the student is processing the information, is able to make a facial response to give back to you, so that they're at least acknowledging what you've said and giving you some kind of reaction. So please don't ask a question if you can't wait for the answer. And also, don't assume because a person can't talk that they don't understand. Oh, this is another one that just drives me crazy. We have a lot of students in our programs when we're working with low incident disabilities. We have students who just can't verbalize or vocalize back. And that doesn't mean that they are not of normal intellect. It doesn't mean that they don't understand what you're saying. It doesn't mean that they're not there because they can't respond verbally to you. I have seen people act cruelly to someone who couldn't respond under the presumption that they didn't understand. And that is so far from the truth, especially with students in autism who are having auditory processing delays, and they really are cognitively there. They just can't verbalize back out to you. So never presume that because they can't talk that they don't understand what you're saying. They understand. Always assume. We're presuming competence. Always assume that the students and the people that you work with understand every word that's coming out of your mouth. So speak as though they do. So I think I'm on number 5. This is a big one for me too. Just because you can't see the disability doesn't mean it's not there. I talk about a person that I worked with way back in the day in the beginning. She was pretty seasoned support staff person, and she was so sympathetic and empathetic to students who had very visible disabilities. Students who had Down syndrome, students who had traumatic brain injuries, students in wheelchairs. She was so empathetic. But for the students with ED or autism who looked very neurotypical and didn't really look like they had a disability, she was almost cruel. It was like she thought they should just do better. So just because you can't see a disability does not mean that it's not there. Have empathy for that. And remember, we're still all talking about presuming competence. And that leads me to number 6, offering choice. I read not that long ago that the average adult makes like 30,000 decisions in a day. Isn't that crazy? Something like 280 decisions about food alone in one day, right? And think about that for a second. When you wake up, you're deciding how many snooze buttons you want to press. You're deciding if you want to get out of bed this time or if you're going to stay in bed. Some of us are deciding if we want to go to work at all. We're deciding on what we're going to wear. We're deciding on what order we're going to get ready in the bathroom. We're deciding on what music we're going to listen to when we're getting ready. We make a million decisions, and if you drive a car to work, you're making a ton. We make tons and tons and tons of decisions before we even get to work. I want you to think about how many decisions are offered to some of our students. Hopefully you're kind of like, oh, right? There are some students who are never offered a choice of what they're going to wear that day. No one offers them a choice about what time they're going to get up. No one offers them a choice about what they're going to get in the cafeteria at breakfast or lunchtime. Sometimes we just choose for our students. We've eliminated so many ways for a student to choose their path that it makes them very passive in their life. And that's definitely not something we want to do, especially when we're presuming competence. We want to make sure we offer as much choice as humanly possible throughout the day so that we don't disjoint the student from the fact that this is indeed their life that they're living. So wherever you find opportunity, offer choice, 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 choice. Number 7, when you're approaching a student who is working with an aide and you want to communicate with that student, talk to the student. Don't talk to the aide. The aide is there for support. I totally get that, but when you're talking to the student, look and face and talk to the student. I've seen it a ton of times where someone will come in and say, "Hi, Johnny," and then just talk to the aide and pretend like Johnny's not there. Talk to the student, ask the student how they are. Even if the aide is going to be the voice and respond for you, you're still making eye contact and interacting with the student. So that's my number 7. Number 8, leave your stereotypes out the door. There are no 2 kids with the same disability that are exactly the same. There's that old saying, right? If you've met one student with autism, you've met one student with autism. There's not one kind of stereotypical way autistic people are, or there's not one stereotypical way that TBI kids are. There's no autistic kids are this way. Students with autism are just students who have autism, and that can manifest in a lot of different ways. So if you're presuming competence, you've just got to leave your stereotypes at the door. Number 9 is don't assume a person can't. Just have those high expectations. They can't yet. There are so many ways that we can modify and accommodate and make adjustments for students and their disabilities so that they can access and be successful, that we should never walk in and say, well, they can't do that, as if it were the end of the story. It's that they can't do that yet. Let's figure out a way to make it happen. If you're always approaching situations that way, you would be astonished at some of the success stories that you'll get. So remember, presuming competence, they can't do it, yet. And number 10, I know this is going to sound crazy to some people, but don't overpraise what is a neurotypical behavior. Now, I know when we're working on behavior plans with students and they do the target behavior that we're working on for replacement, we want to overpraise, right? Like, Johnny didn't slap me today, woo! There's going to be that moment, but sometimes it goes overboard, right? Like, look at Johnny sitting in his chair. Well, Johnny sits in his chair every day, and so do all of his peers. So why are we going crazy over this neurotypical behavior? Now, if Johnny hasn't sat in a chair in 20 years and you've been working on this as a new behavior, as a replacement behavior, that's different. We're using that praise as positive reinforcement. But when an administrator walks in a room, or a campus evaluator walks into a room of students with low incidence disabilities and they're like, look at all the kids just sitting in their chairs. Aren't they just so, aw? That's almost insulting, right? What other room would you walk into at this school where the kids weren't sitting in their chairs? That is a neurotypical behavior that you should expect when you walk into this classroom from any student, including our students. So just to kind of caution you that if you have presumed competence and you have those high expectations, your students, you shouldn't be shocked when students are doing neurotypical behaviors. So that one is just a little bit of pet peeve for me. So, you know, it depends on who you are, but I've seen it happen several times. People walk in a room and seem amazed that our kids have books. Right? So anyway, here we go. That started off as a rant, kind of ended up as a rant, but in the middle, I hope you caught those 10 ways that you can presume competence while working with students with low incidence disabilities, including with autism. There's a whole article written on the blog that goes into a little bit more depth about what presumed competence means, exactly how you can train your staff on getting that done, and then these 10 steps as well. So if you want to get a little bit more, pop over to the blog at www.noodlenook.net. And don't forget, if you're watching all the way through, subscribe now. And sharing means caring, so go ahead and pin this on Pinterest, share it on Facebook, heck, tweet about it. We want to make sure everybody knows to presume competence with students with significant disabilities. All right, y'all. I'll see you next time.